Hey, good morning, and welcome to Hope Hospice's Family Caregiver Education Series. I'm Debbie Emerson, Hope's community health educator and certified dementia practitioner. I've been with Hope since 2014 as the facilitator of our Family Caregiver Education Program. And in addition to my 30 plus years experience as a health educator, I have many years experience as a family caregiver for loved ones with dementia. So my goal today, as always, is to share information with you that's based both on my professional training as well as my personal experiences. And now I'd like to introduce my colleague and co-presenter for today, Gia Barcel.
Thanks, Debbie. As Debbie said, my name is Gia Barcel, and I'm Hope Hospice's Manager of Dementia Services and Community Education. I've been with Hope for, I think it's been about 13 years now. I'm looking forward to talking with you today about dementia behaviors and communication. And my hope is that you'll leave today with a little bit of education that should empower you to know that you are doing the best that you possibly can and you're not alone. Our topics for today's webinar include dementia and communication, dementia-related behaviors, identifying and understanding behavior triggers, and responses and strategies to all the things that we talk about. We also left time at the end for Q&A, so jot down your questions as we go, and we'll be sure and answer as many of them as we can at the end. So a quick review from our Dementia Basics class. And by the way, if you haven't seen it, you can access this webinar on our website at hopehospice.com. Dementia is not a disease. It's a general term for loss of memory, language, problem solving, and other thinking abilities that impair thinking and behavior. There are many other underlying diseases that can cause dementia, including Alzheimer's, strokes, TIAs, Parkinson's disease, and Lewy body dementia, to name a few. There are actually over 100 different types of dementias. And there are three undisputable facts about dementia. All dementias are chronic, all dementias are progressive, and all dementias are terminal. Memory and language tend to decline first, but ultimately all brain functions are impacted. And because persons living with dementia lose their ability to communicate with language, they rely on their behaviors to let us know what their needs and wants are. It's up to us to decipher those needs and wants and to respond appropriately. Communication is all about sending and receiving information. Without communication, we're unable to form relationships. We can't possibly hope to provide good care without effective communication, both verbal and nonverbal. When we talk about communication with regard to a person living with dementia, it's very easy to say, oh, they're just being difficult or stubborn. In fact, the individual most likely won't be able to express what they want or need. They may not be able to find the words they want to use. And this can cause them to be upset and frustrated. Imagine what it would be like if you were unable to express yourself as you'd been doing for your whole life. Personally, I imagine I would be angry, frustrated, and upset. By putting ourselves in their shoes, we can gain a better understanding of how they may be feeling. And then this enables us to be more responsive care partners and to create an environment where a person feels safe and comfortable. When dementia causes one's verbal communication skills to decline, the person becomes more reliant on nonverbal communication. So that's body language, gestures, facial expressions, and tone of voice. Being aware and listening more become powerful tools in managing care and recognizing and responding to unmet needs.
So let's look further at the progression of communication decline. Now, it may begin with the person being unable to come up with a particular word. And we all do this sometimes, and it doesn't mean that we have dementia. I know that when I'm under a lot of stress, I struggle more with word retrieval. The word is on the tip of my tongue, and ultimately I'll think of it or the person's name, or it may pop up in the middle of the night or the next day. But the person living with dementia has these word finding issues on a regular basis. and they may never be able to retrieve the word or the name. By the way, nouns tend to be lost first. The person may compensate by over relying on common or familiar words. Hand me that thing over there. Or they may describe items if they can't remember the precise word. Can you get me that, that thing over there that turns on the TV, the clicker? My father-in-law, who had Alzheimer's, called every woman sweetie to compensate for not remembering names. Now, dementia also impacts one's ability to understand language. It's estimated that in early dementia, a person is unable to comprehend about 25% of the words that are spoken to them. And this percentage worsens as dementia progresses. People with dementia will begin losing their train of thought, and they'll go off on tangents, jumping from one topic to another with no real connection from one thought to the next or one word to the next. You may have heard this referred to as word salad. Everything's kind of jumbled up. They may have difficulty getting to the point, or they may just stop in the middle of their sentence and not be able to complete it. They may perseverate, and that means they repeat words and sentences, or even noises or gestures over and over. We begin seeing a switch from verbal language to nonverbal communication with an increased use of gestures, pointing, grabbing, to express their needs and wants. Now, those with dementia whose first language may not be English may eventually revert to their native language. For example, my mother-in-law's roommate in her residential care facility was born in Mexico, but immigrated to the US as a teenager, so she was fluent in English. However, as her dementia progressed, she was no longer able to speak or understand English. And as I'm sure you can imagine, this loss of verbal communication, both speaking and understanding, leads to social isolation. Remember, communication is the basis of all relationships. And once the person living with dementia is no longer able to communicate, a vicious cycle can set in. They can't easily converse with others and may give up trying. And then others will give up on them. It's just too hard to have a conversation. Now, I put this loss last on my list, but in reality, isolation can occur early in dementia. Understanding how communication skills progressively decline can help us as care partners to help our loved ones with dementia stay engaged and connected. It's essential to everyone's well-being. So I just showed you how dementia can greatly change communication. However, communication does remain possible, but it's up to us, the care providers, to adapt our communication styles. Successful communication depends on how we react and interact. We can change. The person with dementia most likely can't. We know that emotions remain intact until death. So instead of focusing on the words that the person chooses, pay attention to any emotions that may surface. Their words may tell you one thing, but body language, tone, facial expressions may tell you just the opposite. Always show compassion as the person struggles to speak. Rather than looking at them quizzically or asking them to repeat or saying, what'd you say? Try to use other cues to figure out what it is they are trying to say. Now, imagine that you're trying to interpret what a person who's speaking a foreign language is saying. Sometimes we can figure out their message simply by context, tone of voice, and facial expressions, nonverbal language. So always try to maintain a calm, patient demeanor. The person living with dementia quite possibly knows that they are not being understood. Their frustration and anguish will only make communication even more challenging. We always need to show the person respect, and we need to validate their efforts. Sometimes it's easy to treat them like a child, And we, the care partners, take on the role and the demeanor of parents. But the last thing any adult wants is to be treated like a child, especially by a spouse or their adult children. As care partners, we need to allow them to do as much as they can for themselves, even if it means we have to redo it later. We need to focus on what they can do rather than on what they can't. So try to arrange the environment so they can be successful in whatever tasks they undertake. Give them cues and prompts, but don't tell them what to do. Ask them, guide them. Assume the role of a partner, not a parent. It's hard, I know. I remember that I was always trying to make life easier for my mom, and I did everything for her. To be honest, it was easier and faster for me too. But just imagine how you would feel if your spouse or your adult child treated you like you were incompetent, tried to do things for you that you did perfectly well your entire life. Persons with dementia tend to respond to this in one of two ways. Either they withdraw and become depressed, or they can become agitated, aggressive, and non-compliant. These behaviors almost always appear as a result of the person's frustrations and fears. So this is what we mean by the term dementia-related behaviors. Now, more on this from Gia.
Okay, so let's imagine your language has changed to the point of you not being able to express yourself verbally at all anymore. You can't communicate your needs, nor can you provide for yourself anymore. You're also, as Debbie mentioned earlier, only able to understand about 1 in every 4 words that you hear. You're still able to feel your emotions, though: frustration, anger, sadness, loneliness. And you still also have your basic needs: hunger, the need to go to the bathroom, discomfort or pain, overstimulation, boredom, loneliness, the need for meaningful activity. How do you cope with this? How do you express yourself? Well, most likely, you're either going to retreat into yourself or you're going to act out. The main purpose of acting out is for one to attempt to show otherwise hidden or unexpressed emotions, wants, or needs. 80% of all persons living with dementia are going to exhibit behaviors that we need to try and decipher in order to figure out what they're trying to tell us. As care partners, it's our responsibility to work to understand them better so that we can provide quality care. We can safely assume that all behaviors have a purpose. It's up to us to see what needs are behind those behaviors.
So in addition to memory loss and other cognitive changes that Gia just mentioned, as the dementia progresses, many people experience and exhibit symptoms that we call these dementia-related behaviors. So listed here are some of the more common ones. Now, I suspect that many of you have observed these behaviors in those for whom you provide care. Today, we're going to be talking about some of these behaviors and providing you with some strategies that might help you as care partners. But most importantly, your new and improved approaches will make life so much better for your loved ones. Now, there's 2 important resources on our online resource list that I'd like to point out to you. So since we can't possibly cover everything you're going to need to know in our 90-minute webinar, these 2 links in particular contain excellent information about caring for a person with dementia, and they focus on these dementia-related behaviors. The first one is my favorite booklet from the National Institute on Aging. It's called Caring for a Person with Alzheimer's Disease, although we can, project that out to all types of dementia. This booklet's about 104 pages long, so I don't recommend that you print it out. It's well organized, it's thorough, and it's really, really easy to use. And the second I have up here is a brochure from the Alzheimer's Association. called How to Respond When Dementia Causes Unpredictable Behaviors. And this also contains excellent information for care partners. There are lots of other great links on that resource list, but these are two of my favorites. So as Gia mentioned, behaviors provide clues about what the person with dementia is trying to tell us. We always have to assume that the behavior is occurring in response to a need or a desire to communicate. Persons living with dementia may not be able to tell us what they need, but they can show us. And as care partners, we need to put on our detective hats and try to figure out what it is that they need or want. Now, one of the first things we want to do is to always consider pain or discomfort to be a possible cause of dementia-related behavior. Those with dementia do experience pain, but they may be unable to communicate the source, the level, and/or the location of the pain. They probably cannot describe the pain, and the body part that hurts may actually be different from what their words are telling us. And if they don't have words, how can they tell you that their bed or their chair is uncomfortable, or their clothing is too tight, or the zipper is poking them? So instead of asking, do you have pain? Where does it hurt? What's your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10, which is my all-time least favorite question. Instead, look for verbal, nonverbal, and behavioral signs and symptoms of pain and discomfort. So crying, moaning, grimacing, recoiling when touched, rubbing a part of their body, pulling at clothing. And we also need to acknowledge that levels of pain tolerance vary from person to person. So what we may think of as nothing major may be excruciating to someone else. As Gia mentioned earlier, one of the best ways to understand dementia-related behaviors is to try to put ourselves in the shoes of the person with dementia who is unable to communicate their needs. So how do you feel when you really have to use the bathroom or are constipated? Or when you're very hungry or thirsty? Is it uncomfortable? Is it sometimes painful? Now, imagine that you were unable to take care of one of those very basic needs on your own. How might you behave? Would you be agitated, angry, aggressive? I know I probably would be. How about if someone, maybe someone you perceived to be a stranger, began to change your clothes or wash your body or brush your hair? Maybe you couldn't understand their words when they told you that they were going to bathe you. So how would you react? Would you push them away? Would you scream for help? And also think about, does your personality change when you're exhausted? Do you become irritable, impatient, mean? What if you couldn't find a place to take a nap or get to a bed? So I think you probably can see where I'm going with all of this. Sometimes things in the environment or the care setting can be triggers for challenging behavior. Is it too hot, too cold, too noisy? Is the room too bright, too crowded with people or with clutter? People with dementia tend to become hypersensitive to different stimuli, and they may react to things in ways that we wouldn't. And sometimes, for no apparent reason, a particular person can be a trigger for dementia-related behavior. And I'll give you an example of that in the next slide. And then emotions. The number one complaint of those in early stage dementia, loneliness and boredom. We talked about the problem with isolation in a previous slide. So it's not unusual for them to feel overwhelmed, confused, frustrated, or frightened because their whole world has changed. And the familiar has become the unfamiliar. So let's take a closer look at the emotions. Our autonomic nervous system, the part of the brain that's responsible for that fight or flight response, is active from the moment we're born until the moment we die. We see that common instinctive response in nearly all dementia-related behaviors. The person with dementia may be unable to express their fear, so they react by fighting back, physically or verbally. By the way, it's important to counteract that heightened adrenaline response by using calming strategies such as relaxing music, a soothing voice, gentle touch, appropriate body language, because it's our job as care partners to help that person living with dementia to feel safe. With communication, try to assess where the person living with dementia is in that deterioration of his or her communication abilities. We know that communication skills decline with the progression of dementia. So don't make assumptions based on previous abilities, because they may have lost those abilities and they will continue to lose them. As care partners, we need to adapt our style. And if we find a strategy that works, be sure to share that with others. In the social realm, remember that the person living with dementia is able to read body language and facial expressions. They can also detect the rhythm of speech and your tone of voice. So sometimes reactions to other people may seem irrational. So we need to figure out why the person with dementia reacts as they do. So if there's a family member or another close individual who triggers dementia-related behaviors, we may have to recondition the person living with dementia's behavior by helping them to associate positive emotions with that family member who's triggering the behaviors. And my father-in-law lived in a skilled nursing facility for the last year or so of his life. And we visited frequently, and often we would sit with him during a meal. Now, one day there was a new resident in the dining room, and when he saw my husband, who, by the way, my husband is a very nice, kind man, but the new resident became extremely angry and began screaming at my husband in another language. Apparently, my husband's appearance triggered a memory of something scary or unpleasant. So from then on, when that gentleman was in the dining room, we took my father-in-law to a different location in the facility for our visit, because we learned that we could adapt our behavior, but the man who reacted angrily possibly could not. And remember that as dementia progresses, the person quite possibly has lost social skills due to isolation or from the loss of inhibitions of their social filter. They may exhibit socially inappropriate behavior, using foul language that possibly they've never used before in their lives, or acting in a highly sexualized manner. Our best strategy: don't react. Just try to calmly distract. By the way, sometimes sexual behavior is simply the person's way of telling us that they need human interaction. Something as simple as a hug. Remember, their filters are gone and they're unable to appropriately communicate what their needs are. So in addition to assessing the person and the behavior, we also need to take a look at the circumstances in which the behavior occurs. So does it tend to happen at the same time of the day or the week or a day of the week? Where does it occur? Are there notable instances when the behavior does not occur? So look at what happened before, during, or after the behavior. Look at maybe who the person was with. So on our website, there's a handout called Assessing Behavior, and it provides a guide to help you with your assessment, and it summarizes all of the things that I've just talked about. So I'd like to read you just a passage from an article I found on the Family Caregiver Alliance website. I think it does a nice job of summing up what we've been talking about. So, quote, "We cannot change the person. The person you are caring for has a brain disorder that shapes who he has become. When you try to control or change his behavior, you'll most likely be unsuccessful or be met with resistance. It's important to try to accommodate the behavior, not control the behavior. For example, if the person insists on sleeping on the floor, then place a mattress on the floor to make him or her more comfortable. Remember that we can change our behavior, we can change the physical environment. Changing our own behavior will often result in a change in our loved one's behavior.
That is great, helpful information, Debbie. Thank you. So this slide helps us to respond to behaviors that we're seeing. Making sure basic needs are met is the first place to start. Pain, toileting, hunger, thirst, sleep, and human contact. Sometimes what's behind certain behaviors can be as simple as satisfying hunger by providing a snack as we're preparing dinner, because we can see that our person living with dementia is getting hungry and can't understand that dinner will be ready soon. By the way, it's important to note here that if you see a new behavior that's concerning, always check with a medical professional, as new behaviors can be a sign of an underlying medical condition, like a UTI. Assume that the person is scared or confused when you see a behavior. We all behave differently if we're frightened or we don't understand what's happening around us. Softening stimuli and reassuring touch or distraction can be helpful. Instead of getting frustrated and angry when your person living with dementia is following you around the room, not giving you a moment of peace, try stopping what you're doing for a few minutes and giving them your attention. This may reassure them. Then you might be able to give them a job nearby so that you can complete your task. You know, my grandmother used to get agitated around 4 p.m. every day, and she would show us this by following me around the kitchen, asking me over and over again if whatever was cooking in the oven might be burning. I was trying to cook dinner and quickly grew tired of constantly telling her the oven was fine, the food in the oven was cooking along, and showing her that what was in the oven wasn't burned and, in fact, still needed to cook. What I discovered is that she really wanted to be a part of the dinner preparations, as she had been for the last 50 years. I found that if I sat down at the kitchen table with her and held her hand for a few minutes, she began to settle a little bit. And then if I gave her a meaningful helping task, like shredding lettuce into a bowl for salad or folding the napkins for the table, it did a number of things. First, the touch and my attention reassured her emotionally. Allowing her to be in the kitchen with me where she could be a part of things and see me helped reassure her as well. Second, the task helped to distract her and break the repetitive cycle. And third, I gave her a sense of purpose by having her help with the dinner preparations. I addressed her needs by figuring out what was behind her behavior and then adjusting what I was doing accordingly. And any task I gave her was simple with few steps, as I knew she wasn't able to follow more than a simple instruction. But it didn't matter. She felt like she was a part of things. Behavior is communication. It's nonverbal communication. And persons living with dementia aren't trying to be difficult. They're trying to express themselves. Using TIPA Snow's positive physical approach with persons living with dementia allows them to connect with us at their own speed and not feel frightened. Those of you who've been to our webinars before are probably familiar with TIPA's positive physical approach, but I'm going to quickly run down through it anyway as a reminder and for anybody new at this webinar. The first step is understanding that we are entering into their space. So always get permission to enter a room or enter into their personal space. Imagine if you were sitting on your couch watching TV and all of a sudden a stranger appeared right in front of you. You had no clue they were coming into the room. And by the way, this is your safe space, your cozy couch, and you were engrossed in your show. I'm going to guess that one of the first things you would either do is scream out in fear or lash out and try to defend yourself and maybe hit them. So get permission to enter their room or personal space. Remembering that language skills may be diminished, we need to do this without relying solely on our words. So knock to get their attention. Announce yourself and approach from the front where they can see you. And slowly, and by slowly, I mean about 1 step per second, move forward. Use very few words. This should look like, "Hi, Debbie. I'm Gia." You might even say something like, "I'm your granddaughter, Gia." This may relieve them of trying to figure out where they know you from. And remember, introduce yourself every time, no matter if it was just yesterday that you saw them previously. Once you're in their line of sight, make sure that you're not above them, but at eye level, and don't get any closer than about 6 feet apart. Once you've made eye contact, put your right hand up to your right side of your face. This draws their eyes up to your face. Smile and slowly offer your hand out in greeting, as if you were looking for a handshake. Offer being the key word, not forcing. And slow. Allow them ample time to try and comprehend your greeting. Keep your palm up and open until hopefully they place their hand in yours. And now you've made a connection. Try not to break that connection, nor the eye contact connection that you've made. Now you can continue to slowly come forward to sit next to or kneel down closer to them. Remember that a person living with dementia has reduced peripheral vision. So if you aren't right in their field of vision or sight, you might startle them. That could prompt that fright, flight, reflexive response, and that couldn't be good. That won't be good for anyone. So keep in mind these person-centered care techniques as Debbie and I discuss some of the more common dementia-related behaviors in greater detail. As Debbie mentioned earlier, there's a lot more information about behaviors and strategies in that online resource list that you can find on Hope's website.
So before the break, we looked at possible causes of and triggers for dementia-related behaviors. Remember, besides loss of memory and thinking skills, dementia-related behaviors are the symptoms that we tend to see as dementia progresses. So in the next part of the presentation, Gia and I will be going into more detail about some of the more common dementia-related behaviors. And we'll look at some strategies that will help you, the care partner, better manage the behaviors.
Resistant care is any patient behavior which prevents or interferes with a caregiver performing or assisting with ADLs for the patient, including bathing, eating, toileting, dressing, and grooming. It's important to remember that persons living with dementia are doing the best they can with their remaining cognitive or physical ability. They're often expressing what they like or don't like about what care partners are doing or not doing to them or for them. When attempting care, always take time to assess physical limitations or ailments, and then adjust your caregiving accordingly. If you're getting resistance to care, the first thing we can do when this happens is to take a time out. We can observe and think about what might be behind the presenting behavior. Are we trying to bathe them before breakfast, therefore they're hungry and resisting care? Would they be less resistant to bathing after breakfast when they have a contented stomach? Make a change and then try again later. Another example might be trying to get someone ready for bed. It's usually much easier when there's a quiet and calm environment. A brightly lit room with lots of background noise and activity is probably not going to be conducive to helping someone settle down for sleep. Plus, we need to remember that people living with dementia need a lot more time to understand what's happening. Where you or I can understand that it's time for bed, and therefore we should start the process of quieting our bodies and our minds. People living with dementia need visual cues and ample time to process and settle. Being observant and thoughtful to what someone is communicating to us will benefit both the person living with dementia and the care partners. Care will become easier on everyone if both the person living with dementia and the care partners are understanding what's happening. Agitation is a general term used to describe excessive physical movement and verbal activity. This can include restlessness, pacing, verbal aggression, combativeness, calling out, crying, wandering, and repetitive actions. Keeping an eye out for signs so that you can try and circumvent the agitation as soon as possible is helpful. It's not always easy to figure out what's behind the behavior, but if you can figure it out, you'll have a better chance of limiting the triggers and helping them through their agitation when it does occur. First and foremost, always look for pain or discomfort. Agitation might be caused by something as simple as a person being too warm or too cold. Search for signs of pain, both physical and emotional. They may be experiencing the discomfort of a urinary tract infection, or they may be sad or lonely. Limiting alcohol and caffeine, as they are both conduits for changing behaviors of a person, can be a good idea. These can both be unexpected triggers for agitation. If your person living with dementia is experiencing agitation, try and involve them in another activity that may distract them. If they're pacing back and forth in the room, muttering, see if you can join them for a few laps while gently talking with them, or maybe trying to put an arm around them as you walk. After joining them for a bit, you may be able to gently guide them to another room or get them involved in an activity that will calm them or distract them. Too much stimulation or not enough stimulation can be causes of agitation. Also be aware of how someone else might respond to something that could be benign in your eyes. For example, I like to listen to the news while I cook dinner. However, if the news is covering topics like hurricanes, civil unrest, and lying politicians, it may be causing a lot of agitation in someone who can't express themselves or understand. And by the way, even if you think they're not listening or paying attention, don't always make that assumption, because a lot of times they are. Sometimes a little physical movement can help too, even if it's just arm stretches and neck rolling for someone who's sitting in a chair. Often a person can get stuck in a behavior and they just need something else to help them break the pattern. Teepa gives a great example of her observations of a patient's behaviors, how the patient's behaviors weren't something she could just let go, and how she got clever in figuring out how to help this patient get through it. Pay attention to what Teepa does, and then we'll talk about it.
Challenging behaviors, that's how we see it. They're misbehaving. They have problem behaviors. We've got to do something about this. Now, I'm going to call a timeout right now, because the biggest problem we have right here is you've already identified the source of the behavior. You're pretty sure it's them and what they're doing. Timeout. You need to take a step back and realize this is much more complicated than you think. And instead of being such a strong judge and jumping to conclusions, what I want you to do is back off and reframe this. I want you to realize that they're doing the very best they can to try to communicate with you, to meet a need, to express that they aren't liking what you're doing. And unfortunately, you simply see it as not getting your way. What you don't realize is that you started this very frequently in your effort to be helpful. Let me just say to you, you weren't as helpful as you thought you were. I didn't really enjoy the help you gave me. I didn't get it. So you have a choice right now. Are you going to continue to push your agenda to try to get where you want? Or can you take that step back and go, okay, well, this isn't working. Let me rethink. So what you want to do when you experience a behavior you're not liking, you need to, take that step back, take a deep breath, let it go, and realize now it's time to kick in the front of your brain and to become a really good detective. try to figure out what might be driving what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, and what they're feeling. What maybe you're smelling and they're not picking up on, what they're tasting versus what you would be tasting. Because what you want to do is realize that you need to see it from their side. And once you see it from their side, you try to be in their shoes, figure this out. Suddenly, when you see things, hear things, experience things differently, and you make that choice, that decision to do that, the uh-oh becomes an aha, because you can start to realize it's the setting, it's the care, it's the gem. It's who they were before this all started. There's lots of pieces to the puzzle. Your job, if you want to do this well and do this over the course of this condition, is to stop the judgment, time yourself out, and reframe this behavior. Go from a challenging and frustrating, I just don't understand why she's doing this, to pausing for yourself, getting some help, maybe getting somebody else to take a look with you, because maybe you just can't see it because of who you are and how it works. But what you're going to do is take that step back, look more broadly, and at that point, make a decision. What are they trying to do? Are they communicating unmet physical need? There's basically 5 of them you want to learn about, or an unmet emotional need. Or are you seeing the emotional need, but you're missing the physical need? Or was it something that is happening in the environment or happened earlier today? As I said, complicated. So you need some training. You need to know what's going on and what's not going on, so you can quit sitting in judgment and start using this. That's the best tool. That and your ability to bring people together to help you. So with challenging behaviors, it's not about them. It's about us and what we choose to do about this effort to communicate an unmet need, and helping us figure out what is the need and how can we better meet it for success for both of us. Making a positive difference because we choose positive approach to the care. Now, remember this lady? What do you think she's doing? You see her beating on the chairs, making noise, annoying people, and you know she needs to go to the bathroom. It's been a long time. You've tried to make her stop, but she won't. What if I told you she used to clean houses for a living? I'm going to try substitution and a positive approach rather than trying to make her quit. Miss Leona. Well, hey there.
Get your hand.
Get my hand out the way. You're trying to get them clean. Here, try this. She's a busy woman.
There you go.
I'm going to try a substitution here.
I'll trade you.
Not yet. Show her.
Rub it with that. Can you rub it? Yeah. Here, rub
We're
it.
getting there.
Trade me.
Wait.
Trade me. Here you go. Take this. All right, give it. You got it. Now trade out. There you go.
Ta-da.
Now rub it.
Now I show her, and there she goes.
There we go.
People
Good.
are less annoyed, not
Perfect.
so much noise. And she's
Beautiful.
cleaning. Now I want to reinforce it. That's
Yeah.
good. That's good.
2 more to
But I
go.
still haven't met
You're doing a fantastic
her
job.
unmet need. One more substitution.
Nicely done, Leona.
She needs to get finished with this
Boy, you are good.
so we can move on.
You get this one?
Watch me, I'm sneaky.
That's it. Good. Good.
I visually eliminate the task.
Whoa. Woo. That is beautiful. You did a fantastic job. Man, you're a good cleaner. Here. Thank you. All right. Well, come with me and we'll sit down and take a break.
Oh, God.
I know you're ready for
I'm
one, aren't you?
Now, before she goes to sit down, though, we have a place to go.
Girl, you worked hard.
Oh, God.
You are one of the hardest working women I've ever met.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, Lord knows. Let's go to the ladies before we sit down. Though.
Okay.
Okay.
We changed the challenge to success.
So Teepa just gave us a really great example of how to turn an annoying behavior into something positive for both the person and for those who live with them. By the way, if you'd like to share this video with anybody else, the link to it is on your resource list. Okay, so let's take a look at aggression and how best to respond. When we're talking about aggression, we're looking at both physical and verbal behaviors. Physical can include hitting, scratching, pushing, biting, throwing things. Verbal aggression can include insults, threats, yelling, using profanity. Now, there's almost always a reason for aggressive behavior. The person's trying to let us know that there's something wrong, that they have an unmet need. So, as we've said so many times today, our job as care partners is to try to figure out what's going on. We need to anticipate the possible triggers. So, we talked about the common ones in a previous slide. Is it pain? Is it the setting? Or is it emotional? Are they frustrated over their loss of abilities? Do they feel helpless, disrespected, or ignored? Are they lonely? It's difficult to admit, but sometimes our responses, regardless of how well-meaning we might be, can actually cause the situation to worsen. And this is especially true when we have a very close relationship with the person with dementia. So think about yourself for a moment. When you become upset or frustrated, who are you most likely to take it out on? Now, if you're like most of us, we tend to lash out at the persons with whom we are the closest, our spouses, our parents, our children, our pets. We do this because unconsciously we see these individuals as safe. These are the people who tend to love us, warts and all. Now, they may not like us or our behaviors, but deep down, we know that they love us. So I had a hard time understanding why I saw certain not so pleasant behaviors in my mom, yet she never showed that side to my brother. Now, mom also tended to present her ugly side, which, by the way, we all have ugly sides. She would show those to her twin sister, my aunt. It's because she perceived that my aunt and I were safe. It was also probably because we were the ones who were around her the most. We were the easiest targets. And to be honest, since we had the most contact with her, we would lose patience with her more easily, and she could read our emotions. So can you see how our negative emotions could serve as a trigger for my mom's anger and resistance? So my aunt and I finally figured out that we need to try to hide our frustrations with mom. We knew that we couldn't rush things or push her to do what we wanted. We had to anticipate those triggers and we had to remain calm. We had to focus on her, not on her behaviors. And we needed to remember that behind those challenging behaviors was someone that we loved. So I do want to note that sometimes someone with dementia may exhibit aggressive behaviors that you feel are dangerous. It's unsafe for them, for you, or for others. In this case, you need to leave the room if possible and call for help. In extreme situations, you may need to call 911. But, and this is very important, if you do call 911, be sure to tell the dispatcher that the person who's behaving dangerously has dementia, and whoever is sent to respond to the call needs to approach in a calm, non-threatening way.
So let's talk about sundowning. Sundowning is described as a group of symptoms that occur late in the afternoon and maybe into the night. These symptoms can include behaviors such as confusion, anxiety, aggression, delusions, paranoia, crying, restlessness, yelling, wandering, and pacing. 66% of older adults with mid to late stage Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia are affected. Possible causes of sundowning can be being overly tired or overstimulated, or unmet needs such as hunger, thirst, depression, pain, and boredom. So how can we as care partners help? Well, one thing we can do is we can make early evening a quiet time of day. We can reduce noise, play soothing music, read, or go for a walk. Decluttering the space and possibly reducing the number of people in the room might help as well. Close curtains or blinds to reduce the shadows in the room and turn on the lights. Shadows can cause persons living with dementia confusion and possibly even make them think that they're seeing things that you and I can't see. Trees blowing in the wind outside, for example, may put shadows on the wall inside that could be interpreted as something frightening. They could be interpreted as bats on the wall or flames on the wall. Thus, their interpretation is that the house is on fire. Reassurance and distraction can also be helpful. You seem really anxious right now. I'll walk with you. And then as you walk and pace together, see what you might be able to distract with. And by the way, it's really important to recognize that usually arguing with a person living with dementia about what they're seeing isn't going to be helpful. And in fact, it may cause more agitation. Much better to join their reality and then try to distract or remove them from the room so that you have a different environment that may help them to forget about what they were thinking they were seeing.
Okay, so persons with dementia may experience hallucinations and delusions. During hallucinations, a person sees, hears, smells, tastes, or feels something that isn't really there. Now, while certain types of dementia can actually cause the person to hallucinate, in some cases, what seems to be a hallucination may simply be a reaction to shadows or glare. And Gia was just talking about that a little bit. Certain illnesses and medications can also produce hallucinations, as can declining depth perception or loss of the peripheral, the side vision. So it's always good to give the doctor a call if you're starting to notice that your loved one is beginning to perceive things in new and unusual ways. That way you can rule out some kind of a medication side effect or a medical condition. And for example, we always knew when my mom had a UTI, she would become extremely disoriented and confused, much more so than usual. Now, delusions are persistent false beliefs. The person truly believes that their distorted thoughts are real. And the most common delusion is paranoia. And this is where the person may believe, often without good reason, that others are unfair or lying or mean or out to get them. Paranoia may cause persons to become overly suspicious, fearful, or jealous. For example, my father-in-law, who had Alzheimer's, thought that one of the other male residents of his nursing home was having an affair with my mother-in-law, to the extent that he would wheel himself into the other man's room and angrily confront him. The staff would have to calm him down, reassure him, and then distract him. My mom believed that people were stealing from her. With her dementia, she was always misplacing things and then was unable to find them. In her mind, the most logical reason for things going missing was that others were taking them, and no amount of logic or reasoning on my part would convince her otherwise. Now, when she lived at home, she was always accusing her housekeeper of stealing. When I would come over and find the missing items, usually in the oddest of places, and say, "Look, Mom, Nicole didn't steal your Target gift cards. I found them under your shoe rack." Her response was that Nicole hid the cards in her shoe rack and was planning to steal them later. My mom had lost her ability to remember recent information and events, and that's a huge loss. So blaming Nicole was her way of protecting her dignity and making sense of something senseless. In persons with dementia, paranoia is often linked to memory loss. So don't be offended if your loved one is accusing you or another trusted person of stealing or some other offense. Allow them to express their concerns, take them seriously, and offer reassurance. My mom's issues with her housekeeper had become so troubling that I ultimately had to let the housekeeper go. Now, that was hard because I knew the housekeeper was honest and kind. And actually, so did my mother on one level. She really liked her. But the distress it caused my mom wasn't worth it. And I needed to show my mom that I believed her and cared about her. So, for their sake as well as yours, it's not a bad idea to have extra sets of items on hand that tend to get misplaced, such as keys, reading glasses. But this is not always possible. Example, ultimately, my mom was unable to live alone, even with my help, and she moved to a skilled nursing facility. And there she was always misplacing her dentures. Now, of course, in her mind, the nursing staff were the ones stealing them. Now, it's important to note that sometimes suspicions turn out to be true. So rather than routinely discounting accusations, be sure to always check out the situation and rule out elder abuse. Now, our loved ones with dementia are prime targets for unscrupulous people. And sadly, the most frequent culprits are family members or friends. Now, Jim mentioned earlier about the problem with TV. There is a lot of distressing stuff on TV these days. And sometimes those with dementia can think that violent or upsetting content may be real, and what's happening is actually going on in the room or on their street. So it's always good to monitor what's on TV and turn it off when the programming is upsetting or serves as a trigger for unsettling behavior. One last thing, I do need to note here that hallucinations are one of the first indicators of Lewy body dementia. The hallucinations tend to involve children and animals, usually pretty benign. But if you're noticing these types of things in your loved one, it's important to contact their physician. So an example, a friend of mine's mom would see children playing in the yard, just beyond their sliding glass doors. So instead of trying to convince her that there were no children out there, my friend learned to comfort her mom because her mom was worried about the kids. My friend would go outside and my friend would go outside and she would tell the imaginary children that it was time to go home. Or she would tell her mom that she was going to call the children's parents and ask them to come and pick them up. Then she would close the blinds and engage her mom in another activity. Remember, it's important to validate and then distract. So wandering is another common dementia-related behavior. In fact, it's estimated that about 60% of those with dementia wander away from their residences. My father-in-law was an escape artist. So even though he was in a wheelchair, he managed to sneak out of his nursing home. One time he made it down to the end of the block. And then when he saw the staff frantically coming down the street after him, he stopped and pointed at them and just started laughing. He was leaving because he missed his wife, and he was just going out to find her. Usually there's a reason for the wandering. The person feels the need to get somewhere. So someone who may be living in the past may try to leave every afternoon at 3 p.m. to pick up their children from school. A person may express a need to go to work, even though they retired years ago. And oftentimes, they just want to go home, even though they are home. It's important to note that often when one has dementia, home is more of a feeling than an actual location. Home is a place where we feel comfortable and safe. So a good strategy to try when someone keeps saying that they want to go home or actually tries to leave to go home is to distract by saying, "Oh, tell me about your home. What's special about it? Do you live with anyone else?" So engage them and try to give them a sense of safety and security and assure them that they're not alone. Remember, home is as much of a feeling as it is a place. So another example for you. One rainy day, several years ago, I was visiting with my mother-in-law in the lobby of the skilled nursing facility where she resided. And one of the residents decided that he was going to leave the facility and walked out the front door. By the way, in skilled nursing facilities, it's illegal to lock the doors, from the inside. We see that more in locked memory care facilities, but in assisted living and skilled nursing, we don't. So I saw the gentleman, leave the facility. So I ran into the office to let the administrator know what had happened. Without hesitation, the administrator grabbed an umbrella and he calmly walked out the door to join the resident. He didn't yell, "Hey, come back here," or try to physically restrain him. He just opened the umbrella, gently took the man's arm, and he walked down the street with him in the rain. Now, I couldn't hear their conversation, but it just appeared to be two friends taking a leisurely stroll in the rain. Within a few minutes, they came back, and the administrator took the man into the activity room so he could join the other residents who were, I don't know, doing an activity or watching a movie. I was really impressed with how this administrator diffused what could have been a disastrous situation. He didn't panic, but he treated the resident with kindness and respect. And to note, walking is such great exercise that we actually want to encourage that. If the person is safe, that's the key. But we need to ensure that our loved ones always are safe. So as care partners, we need to be sure that wandering is always done in a safe manner, because the last thing we want is for someone to become lost or to get hurt. And if we know that a person has a tendency to wander, try to anticipate what it is they need, what they're looking for, and try to address that need in advance. So when you're at home, you can keep your doors locked or place the lock up high or down low on the door in kind of a unusual place. There's lots of technology out there to help with monitoring. You can install a device that chimes when the door is opened. Some alarm systems do that automatically. There are shoe inserts that have tracking devices. Smartphones and watches can do that too. But there's no guarantee that your loved one is going to have their phone or their watch with them. Now, most likely they'll have their shoes or their slippers on when they leave the house. So in some cases, if you're going to use those shoe insoles, those tracking devices, you'll have to buy a couple of sets and put them in both the shoes, the slippers, the most likely things that your loved one will wear when they leave the house. And then always be sure that your loved one carries ID, such as a medical alert bracelet or a necklace with information about their condition and where they live. They have new watches that do that as well. Let your neighbors and the police know about the situation. And always try to keep a recent photo of your loved one handy, and try to make a mental note of what they were wearing that day, just in case. You also may want to enroll the person in a wandering plan, such as medical alerts program. So let's take a real quick look at that. So this slide contains info about the different services that Medical Alert offers. Now, there are lots of different, wandering, programs, and I'm not necessarily promoting this one, nor have I used it personally, but it is the one that's partnered with the Alzheimer's Association, and it appears to be quite comprehensive. So, of course, you have to pay a yearly fee. As you can see, the plans include a variety of services, and I think the most important ones listed here are the 24/7 emergency response team, emergency contact info, of course, the wandering support, and easy access to advanced healthcare directives, DNRs, medical info. So the wandering support option is included in the Advantage plan that it costs $49.99 a year. Now, if your loved one lives in a memory care facility, be sure to talk with administration about what types of monitoring and safety protocols that the facility uses. Okay, well, today we've covered some common dementia-related behaviors, but there are others, such as rummaging, hoarding, personality changes, repetitive behaviors, sleeping and eating problems, inappropriate sexual behaviors. Now, we've created some new webinars for next year that cover all of these. So you can go online and take a look at our schedule of classes and see if there are any classes that might be needed or necessary or of interest to you. And be sure to check the resource list on our website that goes along with this webinar. There's lots more great info there to help you in your caregiving journey. Now, you may have noticed that many of the strategies are the same for helping to identify and meet the needs of our loved ones. It's not rocket science, but it does require that we be observant, that we be understanding, and that we be responsive care partners. And along those lines, Gia's going to review one more time.
Yeah, so let's review. Check for pain or any unmet needs, both emotional and physical. Reasoning with a person living with dementia will get you nowhere. Instead, focus on identifying the underlying need and go from there. Validate any feelings you can and remember to address the need, not the behavior. Since short-term memory is most affected, avoid asking questions that rely on this as answers. Remember that processing is limited and much slower, so allow time for tasks and keep the tasks simple. We all need to feel like we have a purpose. Create activities that will contribute to feelings of purpose and meaning, no matter how small. Remember, the person living with dementia is doing the best they can, and they can't change their behaviors. We can, and we can change the situation to make it a little easier on everyone. Respond, don't react. Behaviors are a method of communication, and it's our job to be detectives and figure out what it is they're trying to communicate.
Okay, thanks, Gia. And thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to take a quick look at the question box now. But if you do need to leave, feel free to contact Gia or me if you have further questions or comments. We'll look forward to hearing from you. So I cannot see, because I'm sharing my screen, I can't see the question box. Gia, do we have any?
So far, we do not have any questions, nor do we have anything in the chat. Maybe just give it another second. But I'm thankful that we've got up on the screen. People know how to reach us if they come up with a question after sitting with this information for a little while. Yeah, I think we're okay, Debbie. I don't see any further questions.
Okay, well then with that, I just want to say again, thanks so much for joining us. And I hope everybody has a happy, a healthy, and a safe holiday season. And we'll see you in, oh my goodness, 2024. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.